Hi guys, today going to be building a backdrop. This bit was pretty much improvised, so I just grabbed some foamcore and started cutting rectangles, then glued them together to make a generic kind of ruined castle shape. I wanted to have two levels, so there's the kind of walkway a little higher up, and then beneath that there's sort of a debris area. I had a base from another project which I abandoned, so cannibalized that and used it as a base for this one. Then I'm going to add some stone bricks, so grabbing a chunk of styrofoam, measuring it to the size of the wall, we're going to chop that into thinner pieces which we can use to sculpt rocks on. Now I decided to go for a combination of the two kind of common stonewall techniques, one of where you carve into the styrofoam and another where you cut individual bricks. So I cut smaller sections, then carved the bricks into them, so there would be some variance in depth and size on the wall, but it would be a lot quicker than individually cutting out every brick and attaching them to the wall. Then adding a lot of cracks, kind of broken brick, then rolling with the styrofoam ball to get that good old rock texture. You want to make sure you always kind of hit the edges as well and bevel them down to give it a more natural appearance. Then if you have a kind of sharp edge of the tinfoil ball, you can normally work that into the cracks as well. So once all these sections were carved up, I glued them to where the walls were, and then started working on the walkway. So for this one I did cut individual bricks. So for this bit it's a lot easier if you roll the texture on before you cut them individual bricks, but it doesn't hurt to hit them twice, so you can also round the edges. Then I glued them down all over the walkway, and I left some big gaps between them because I want to fill those in later, and I want to add that kind of crumbly broken rock and dirt texture all over everything. So the base frame turned out to be a bit too high, so just trim that off. And a bit of the side section was as well, so that also got a trim. And grabbing some coffee stirrers, going to snap them into 3 or 4 pieces. We want to naturally snap them instead of using a pair of clippers because we want to have that kind of broken and rotten wood end to them. Then gluing these into where one of the stone sections was sticking out a bit further. Thought that looked a bit like it could be the basis for a floor. So this now has the effect of a floor that's fallen in, some planks that are still stuck to the side. I suppose you could technically put a guy up there or like a rat or something, that'd be pretty fun. Now mixing up some Sculpting mold. Now we're going to give this a coat over pretty much everything except for where we want the stone face to show through. So you can push it into the cracks where they're a bit too deep, and on the left where there are no bricks, that's going to entirely make up the face there. This is a really good material for just building up bulk, although it does take a very long time to completely dry. So you're normally looking at 2-3 days for it to be workable with. And as well as using it to make bulk, you can use it to represent kind of mortar between the bricks. So if you water it down even further, you can almost pour it over the bricks, then kind of spread it out with a finger, and you'll get some very good coverage that way. Now, it was starting to get a bit stiff to work with, so I went in with my fingers and just started smushing it around the edge of the frame. Now, I'm not going to do anything to the back of this piece, it's just going to be left foam core, but for the edges I am going in with the Sculpting mold, so from one angle it should look like a complete piece. Now we are mixing roughly 50-50 of a coarse flock and fine cork powder, and then we're going to mix that again with another part PVA, and this is going to form a sort of finer texture paste that we're going to put all over the sculptor mold, so we can get rid of that smoothness of it. It'll also be good for adding some texture on top of the bricks, and it can be used to represent kind of like a moss growing over the outside of the stone. Just going all over the base, and over about half of the bricks we're just going to smear that everywhere and make sure there's a nice kind of rough coat everywhere. So by just putting it on the sculptor mold, you can also make like a really good kind of crumbling rock and turf mixture, and it's very good for kind of filling gaps that you don't really know what you want to do with it. Now we're going in with a black gesso, and we're going to give that a nice coat all over. But don't worry if you miss a few of the kind of crevices and recesses, we will be going in with another few layers of paint later. And if it does bother you, you can water it down a little bit and then make sure it drips into the cracks. Or go in and add a bit more of the flock texture paste mixture. Or stick a plant over the top. There are many options. Now, with a grey paint, we're just going to go and hit all the rocks. And we don't want to hit as much of the dirt with this. Just making sure you hit those recesses. Then with the brown paint we're going to hit the planks, and we're also going to hit everywhere where the texture paint is heavier than the stone. So it's going to be all over the base as well as on the side of the wall there, where there's a lot of the texture paste build up. So mixing that with the grey mixture, you can kind of balance the colour out a little bit. And we basically want to use these two colours as the kind of coverall for the entire piece. And then we're going to hit them with a third colour over the top, and that's going to tie them together. But that undercoat will still show through a bit. So we're then going to take the same mixture and add a good amount of white and mix that together, and then this is going to be our kind of coverall, kind of heavy dry brush layer. So we're going to pick out the details, and we're just going to hit every section. That's going to tie it all together nicely. And by using the same mixture as earlier and working while some of the paint's still a little bit damp, you can get like a nice kind of wet blend, and it'll keep it all within the same colour range and make it all look as if it belongs together. And you want to go a little bit heavier with this on the top side of the stone to emulate a bit of lighting. And you can afford a sort of lighter dry brush on the base, because where that rough texture paste is, that will just pick out the details of it and leave a lot of the darker colours in the recesses. Now, taking a small amount of green and mixing that in as well, we're going to hit some of the walls, and this is going to be where sort of mould and damp and maybe some moss has built up. We're just going to dab that over several places. Not too much, less is generally more when you're adding kind of another colour. But it will all kind of darken down a little bit when it dries. So then, once that's all dry, going with some PVA and some clump foliage, we're going to add some plants that have grown out through the edges. And again, less is generally more when you get to this step. But then again, if you go overboard and cover absolutely everything with foliage, that can look great too. Really depends on the kind of world you want to capture. Now, going with some Vallejo water effects, we're just going to put several drops in the bottom where there's that sort of basin at the middle of the piece. And make sure the paint's completely dry at this point, otherwise it will bleed through. And you can get a really nice effect if you kind of overlap some of the plant, like the clump foliage, with the water effect. And there we have the finished piece. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. You can also use all these techniques making ruins or whatever. Catch you next time.